All right. Well, continuing on talking about the mission of God for the family, and we're going to maybe a passage that is not the most common passage when you want to start talking about family. Going to go to Mark 5 and talk about the man amongst the tombs, the man possessed with legion, the Gadarene, uh, the Gadarene man possessed with 1,000 demons. Um, and I want to talk about what this shows us about the process of restoration, or the process of moving from a rivalrous mentality to a harmonious mentality within a community, and how that applies in family, because it's a strange but really interesting passage. So Jesus and the disciples, they come across the sea into the country of the Gadarenes. It's Decapolis is where they're landing, and they get out of the ship. And right as they get out, there's a man who's been living amongst the tombs, who's possessed with an unclean spirit. It says, right, he is cast out of the community because he's unclean, and so he's been living amongst the tombs. They can't bind him. It doesn't matter if they chain him up. They try, handcuffs and chains, all sorts of different things, and he always just tears them apart. He breaks the iron in pieces, and so no one could tame him. Right? He's wild, and always he's in the mountains, he's in the tombs, and he's yelling, he's cutting himself with stones. But he sees Jesus, and he runs towards him, and he begins worshiping him. And he cries out with a loud voice. He says, "What do I have to do with you, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that you do not torment me." Right? And so we know that this is the demon speaking through the man at this point. Um, because when Jesus now responds, he responds to the spirit, the unclean spirit. "Come out of the man, unclean spirit," he says. And so he says, "What's your name?" And he says, "My name is Legion, for we are many." All right. So this one demon is actually a representative voice for 1,000 demons, or a legion of demons. And it's really interesting that he has been sort of cast out of the community because of this unclean spirit. But then he says, but then the response is, "Please don't send us out of the country." Right? Don't send us away out of the country. Um, and so there's a certain amount of fear-based stay-at-home mentality, where even though it's obviously awful, he's cutting himself, he's out amongst the tombs, he doesn't want to leave. Uh, that because he is in a place that he knows, or that he thinks he loves, maybe even. And but near the mountains, there's this big herd of swine, and now it switches to plural, which I think is really interesting. So it switches from unclean spirit in the singular to demons. Um, and they say together, "Send us into the swine. We want to go into them." And Jesus says, "You can." The unclean spirits now enter into the swine, and they run down and they drown. There are about 2,000, 2,000. It says there were about 2,000, and it could reference the herd, but it could also reference that's how many demons were in there, and they're drowned. Right? They're cast out of the land into the sea, and they drowned. And there, the herdsmen run to the city, and kind of as they run through the country, they go out and they say, "You're never going to believe what happened." And then all of the people, or a group of people, come out to Jesus to basically ask him to go away. And they see that the man that was possessed with all of the demons, that had the legion of demons, the 2,000 demons, sitting and clothed in his right mind, and it terrifies everyone, right? So they couldn't tame him. They tried to lock him up, but he had some sort of uh, dysfunctional relationship with the city, in that his presence out there, um, kind of demon possessed as as a bucket for them to throw all of the demons into for their city was somehow making the people in the city believe that they were safer, right? Because when he is in his right mind, when he is healed, they say, now we're in trouble. Right now, we're in trouble. So they ask Jesus to go away. So whether they're afraid of Jesus or they're afraid of not having, of getting rid of this dysfunctional relationship, even though he would sit out there and he would howl, and it was a scary thing. It was a terrifying and dangerous situation. The dysfunctional situation was, they still didn't want it fixed because the person that came in and begins fixing it, they reject, right? They reject Jesus as soon as he starts actually making things better. But the same way that this man says, please don't send me away, right? He doesn't want to be sent away from the people that keep locking him up, tying him up. He doesn't want to be sent away from the land that he is terrorizing. So he thinks that he loves this place, but he's actually terrorizing it. And then the people that are being terrorized, when they see the person getting better, the city has wrapped up its safety or its identity or something with the relationship with this monstrous person out there, and they don't want it. And they don't want it fixed, right? So, and there's so much about like a real dysfunctional situation that you see reflected here, that even when we know it's something is bad, we reject the Christ's uh, healing presence when it first arrives, right? Because it's terrifying, because you're going into a situation that you're going from a situation that may be bad, but you understand the badness of it, into a situation you don't understand when it gets better. And so they say, the city says to Jesus, please leave this place, right? We don't want you here. Now, this is Decapolis is ten kind of coastal villages that have joined together for protection. It's mostly Gentiles, although there's Jews there as well. And when they ask Jesus to leave, Jesus gets into the ship, and the man that had been possessed with the demon says, can I come with you? Right? I want to go with you. And Jesus says, no, go home to your friends and tell them how great the things that the Lord has done for thee, and tell them that God has had compassion on you. Right? He says, go tell them what God has done. Right? So tell them how you've been changed. Tell them what's different. And so he leaves, and he goes to Decapolis and begins telling everybody that he knows that he has been changed. Right? So he and the this this is it's really an interesting thing that the evangelism here in a dysfunctional situation, the the best evangelism is for you to be changed, right? You being a different person, you being changed becomes the evangelistic uh message. Because because what a real dysfunctional situation does is change actually becomes terrifying, because every single person sets into their role and gets comfort in their role, and they come to know and understand their role in a dysfunctional situation, and in a situation where there's a deep rivalry, where there's a scapegoating. You understand your role. And there's some really interesting books on family dysfunction, on the different kinds of roles that people end up taking. But there's a comfort in knowing your place, even in a dysfunctional situation. And that's why saying God has had compassion on me and I am different, is becomes a message of good news, because you're suddenly, you're being removed from the uh, communal dysfunction by Jesus. And as you are, being able to say, I'm actually good out here. I'm good outside the system. Becomes really, really good news, and makes it possible for other people's imagination to start to say, well, maybe I can get out of this system as well. And what we see is 2 chapters later, Jesus and his disciples, they leave Tyre and Sidon and they land on the in Decapolis again. And this time, his reception is completely different, right? Because this time, in this is 7, starting at 31, they begin bringing people that need healing. They and he, this is where he picks up the he touches somebody's tongue. He puts his finger into somebody's ear. He spits, and he uses his saliva in to heal one person. Right, so you have this really interesting situation where these Gentiles all come rushing over and say, "Okay, we're ready to be healed now. We're ready to be changed." And he begins uh, he begins healing them, and then he says, "Don't tell anyone." Right? You don't go around telling everyone yet. Um, and this is part of the Gospel of Mark. There's a kind of the Messiah aspect of Jesus's ministry is kept a secret for a time, and then it finally breaks out as he comes to Jerusalem, and you have blind Bartimaeus get to be the first one who declares publicly that Jesus is the Christ, and that's telling us that that Israel, who has been blind, is finally about to see their Messiah. And so you've got this. The Gospel of Mark has a, Jesus telling people, all the people that Jesus says, okay, don't tell anyone yet, don't tell anyone yet, are you know pointed out in the Gospel of Mark. And some of this might be just because they're Gentiles and his ministry is to Jews first, and eventually the Gentiles are going to get the gospel. But here, these Gentiles come out and get him, and so he has compassion on them. But they're sort of the first fruits of the eventual conversion of the Gentiles. But you can see that it actually took one person being changed, one person being removed from the rivalry, one person being removed from the dysfunction, and then them seeing that it lasts and that they're okay outside the dysfunction to uh, bring everybody else along. So there's I think, a really interesting, neat thing to be learned from the this Mark's 5 through 7 section about the way that about the process that Jesus takes people, communities through that have been really dysfunctional in order to heal them. So hopefully that helps some people either understand or find a way out of rivalry, or understand why it is when you're in some sort of crazy dysfunction and then Jesus saves you and you're like, but it's better outside the dysfunction, that they attack you, or that they're not interested, because we get so used to dysfunction that it becomes a safe feeling, um, that you get a safe feeling attached to it, even when you know it's bad. So, all right, that is uh, some mission of God for the family, and we'll be back tomorrow.